political ideologies, part A, B, C, D, E, F. Now we will be discussing the part G, which is fascism and new fascism. Okay, so let's begin with. When we talk about the ideology of fascism, a name comes in our mind, which is Mussolini. This was the leader of current day Italy in 1923 right up to 1944. Mussolini basically defined as the union of state and the corporate power. Using that definition, can we claim that North America is anything but fascist? Keep in mind one basic principle, that fascism is an ideology which is not welcomed by the contemporary West, because they think that this is basically a totalitarian and an authoritarian system of governance, right? Okay, so fascism. To start with the fascism, we need to learn about a very renowned American philosopher, Noam Chomsky. Next slide, Karlin. So Noam Chomsky gives I need to share one ideology or one citation of Noam Chomsky. So let's begin with a lot of the people who call themselves left, I would regard as proto-fascists. Okay, so means that fascism, Nazism, they are also a kind of a leftist ideology, not the rightist people. Rightists are the liberals, the Democrats, the conservatives. So fascists, they call themselves left, but according to Noam Chomsky, people who call themselves left are basically the prototypes of the fascism. So next slide. Start with the introduction. Fascism is a political theory which advocates an authoritarian hierarchical government as opposed to democracy or liberalism. Next slide. Now this man, Michel Foucault, he was a French sociologist and a philosopher, a great name, a very influential scholar of contemporary anthropology and contemporary sociology. So Michel Foucault, he talks about fascism in such ways like, you see, the strategic adversary is fascism. The fascism in us all, in our heads and in our everyday behavior. The fascism that causes us to love power, to desire the very thing that dominates and exploits us. Now this citation gives you a gist of, a qualitative gist of understanding what is fascism according. Okay, moving towards the next slide. Mussolini, a great name, 1883 and 1945. So he says that it is humiliating to remain with our hands folded while others write history. It matters little who wins. To make people great, it is necessary to send them to battle even if you have to kick them in the pants. That is why, that is what I shall do. So Benito Mussolini, a journalist turned a ruler in Italy after post-World War, during during the Second World War. Okay, so fascism as a concept. This word fascism was a product of the 20th century, and one noted scholar of fascism remarked that even in 1920, the word fascism was known to very few people in Europe. Even Mussolini placed it between quotation marks as being a neologism. Okay, so its a late emergence on the political scene is viewed by some political sociologists as profoundly significant for the somewhat heterogeneous character of the movement. Okay, next slide. The portrait, next slide. This will be a citation. I hope you will read in detail and you will get to know the concepts of fascism. Now we turn towards the etymology of fascism. Next slide. The word fascism derives etymologically from the Latin fascis, which means bundles of rods, bound together something, or bound together, symbolizing strength in unity, which were traditionally carried before consuls in the Roman Republic, indicating their authority. Now, आपने बचपन में एक किस्सा सुना होगा कि वो दो भाई थे, वो लड़ते रहते थे, फिर उनके बाप ने लकड़ियों का एक गट्ठा मंगाया, फिर उन्होंने कहा उन लकड़ियों को अलग-अलग किया और फिर उन्होंने कहा कि इन्हें तोड़ें, तो उन्होंने सारी लकड़ियों को तोड़ दिया, फिर उन्होंने दूसरा गट्ठा मंगाया और उसको इकट्ठा रखा और कहा कि इसे तोड़ें, तो कोई भी नहीं तोड़ सका। तो उसने कहा कि देख लें, इत्तफाक में बरकत होती है। तो फैशिज्म लैटिन जुबान में फैशिज्म का मतलब वो ही लकड़ियों का गट्ठा है, जो कि बताता है कि ये किसी भी रियासत की जो इत्तफाक है उसको जाहिर करेगा, सारे लोग मुल्क की खातिर इकट्ठे हो जाएं। लेकिन फैशिज्म जब फैशिज्म प्रैक्टिकली जब लेट्स से काबिल अमल हुआ, तो वो पूरे लेट्स से पूरी दुनिया में उसका जो असर था वो नेगेटिव हो गया, बल्कि डेमोक्रेसी और कैपिटलिज्म को लगा कि ये हमारे ख़िलाफ़ एक जो है एक सिस्टम आ गया है। लिहाजा लोगों ने क्या किया कि जो है वेस्टर्न जो कंट्रीज थे जो कैपिटलिज्म और डेमोक्रेसी को रन कर रहे थे, वो सारे फिर इकट्ठे हुए और फिर उन्होंने जो है वो फैशिज्म और नाज़िज़म यानी जो जर्मनी का हिटलर था, इनके ख़िलाफ़ लड़ाई शुरू की और फिर बहरहाल वेस्टर्न डेमोक्रेसी और कैपिटलिज्म को फतह नसीब हुई। किसी एक मौके के ऊपर मैं बहुत ज़्यादा डिटेल से एक सेमिनार टाइप जो है वो हम मुनक्किद करेंगे, जिसके अंदर आपको ये चीज़ें मज़ीद भी क्लियर हो जाएंगी। ओके जी, नेक्स्ट स्लाइड। एक्सप्लेनेशन। Fascism is an ideology that introduces totalitarianism as the objective of the political decision making. Rejecting the ideologies of liberalism and conservatism and socialism, fascism presents itself as an elitist response to modern social and political problems that the older ideologies leave unsolved and unresolved. So the fascism of Mussolini and Hitler has survived in the more modified form in the ideologies of the new fascist organizations such as Aryan nations and various skinhead groups. तो अगरचे फैशिज्म ख़त्म हो गया है और नाज़ीज़म भी ख़त्म हो चुका है, लेकिन वो आइडियोलॉजी आज भी प्रिवेल करती है। जैसे कि स्किनहेड ग्रुप्स हैं जर्मनी में, वो कहते हैं कि जी ये बाहर के जो लोग हैं उन्हें जर्मनी में नहीं आना चाहिए और वो अपनी नस्ल परस्ती के ऊपर बहुत फ़ख्र करते हैं। इसी तरह आरएसएस एक जो है ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है इंडिया की, वो भी रेशियल सुपीरियरिटी के ऊपर जो है वो बात करती है। ओके जी, सो डिक्टेट्स ऑफ फैशिज्म। फैशिज्म कहता क्या है, फैशिज्म जो है उसकी आइडियोलॉजी है क्या, तो उस पर ज़रा हम बात कर लेते हैं जी। तो fascism argues in favor of a totalitarian government. ये totalitarian state से मुराद एक ऐसी गवर्नमेंट जिसके अंदर ऑपोजिशन नाम की कोई चीज़ ना हो, एक हाकिम हो, वो अपनी मर्जी से हुकूमत को चलाए और जिस चीज़ को वो कहे सही है तो वो सही है और जिसे वो कहे गलत है तो वो गलत है। ऑपोजिशन को या तो क्रश कर दिया जाए या उनको बिल्कुल गूंगा बहरा करके, अंधा करके एक साइड पे बिठा दिया जाए, क्योंकि उनका ख्याल है कि ऑपोजिशन से एक कौम जो है वो तकसीम होती है, लिहाजा ऑपोजिशन की ज़रूरत ही नहीं। अगर तो वो हाकिम जो टोटलिटेरियन गवर्नमेंट है, अगर वो वाकई बड़े मुत्तकी हों और मुल्क का फ़ायदा करने वाले हों और वह हिदायत याफ्ता हों, फिर तो मुल्क का फ़ायदा होगा। लेकिन नॉर्मली देखा गया है कि इस तरह के फैशिस्ट जो हैं वो मन मर्जियाँ करते हुए ताकत का, इक़्तिदार का चस्का उनके मुंह को लग जाता है। खून जब मुंह को लग जाता है तो उसके बाद क्या होता है कि फिर वो लोगों के ऊपर, जो भी लोग उनकी आइडियोलॉजीज़ के साथ एग्री नहीं करते, उनको फिर बहुत ज़्यादा जुल्म सितम का निशाना बनाया जाता है। नंबर 2, द आइडियोलॉजी asserts that the state is more important than the individual. Number 3, this ideology rejects the idea that civil institutions should leave an important role in limiting the power of the states and criticizing the laws of the state. Number 4, it affirms that individuals are to gain a sense of purpose by psychologically identifying with a totalistic state and devoting themselves to service to that state. Fifthly, it also rejects the concept of equality. And sixthly, it advocates nationalism and sometimes racism. Next slide. So Mussolini further describes fascism as an ideology promoting nationalism. So nationalism is defined as an alternative to both internationalism and individualism. So with respect to the first concept, which is internationalism, Mussolini rejects the argument that international alliances should be allowed to override the national sovereignty, because he maintains that international structures should not be used to erode the national authority. International alliances should not be used to try to undermine or constrain the decision-making powers of the national leaders. Okay, what is in fascism? The cosmopolitan universal international perspectives should not outweigh the concerns and needs of Italy, for example, on issues involving Italian national politics. National loyalties are potentially stronger sources of power than international alliances could ever be, according to Mussolini. In understanding this, fascists are able to draw out of a people's its national potentialities and direct those towards shared interests. Okay. Please turn to the slide number 16, Mr. Satyan. Okay, Mussolini asserted that the citizen should commit to being in a position of subordination to the fascist state, but insisted that the subordination was a form of popular empowerment. So Mussolini made a decision between the subordinated citizens, number 2, individualistic individuals. Okay, now the subordinated institutions, they knew their own well-being was tied up with the ability of the nation and the state to survive or the state to thrive. Therefore, they did nothing to weaken either nation or the state. They knew to obey the state, just as the hand knows to obey the brain in the interest of the survival of the entire body. So by contrast, the individuals and the groups who lacked deference to the fascist state and who pursued their own personal objectives in opposition to the fascist state undermined unity, competition among the individualistic people, each seeking his or her own agenda, tore apart societies and prevented the emergence of the nationalist shared interest embodied in a totalistic state. Okay, the individualistic people, they might think themselves empowered, but they were not, as the corrosive agents of weakening nations and as opponents of the totalitarian politics. Such individuals undermine the one thing that could give them real power. So, membership in something much larger than themselves, namely membership in a nation governed by a unified totalistic government. Okay, indeed, Mussolini was adamant in distinguishing his own fascist government from police states. So, absolutist monarchies and other conventional forms of authoritarian governments. So, these governments, Mussolini said, that ruled over people and crushed them rather than empowering them. These states repressed people without giving them strength. So, the fascist states, by contrast, they are ruled over people, but did so ethically. Insofar as the state's repression kept the entire body of the nation unified and thus vigorous. Okay, next slide. Adolf Hitler, another fascist and a Nazist ruler who ruled with cruel. His policies turned out to be short-lived. Born in 1889 and 1945, and he shot himself, committed suicide, because his philosophy of running the international politics was failed, and he was surrounded by the Allied forces, the capitalist world, the USA and the NATO. Okay, turning towards the next slide. He says that we tolerate no one in our ranks who attack the ideas of Christianity. Our movement is Christian, according to Adolf Hitler. He delivered this in a speech, October 27th, 1928. Okay.